CEO, shouldn't we rather start the proceedings, because I heard that the Deputy Minister has got another appointment at 10.
Yes, Chair. The public secretary was just joining now, half a minute. Then I'll cut into my time for 10 minutes already. That is gone. So I'll just talk for 3 minutes and then we'll still be on time. Yes. Let me see if she's in. Okay. Anyway, I think she'll catch up. Yeah. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and regards to the Chairperson of the Human Rights Commission, the acting public protector, and the Deputy Minister of Justice, John Jeffrey, and all other invited speakers and guests. Welcome to this very important conference organized jointly by the South African Human Rights Commission and the Public Protector to look at the issues of corruption and its impact on human rights. The reason why we as two Chapter 9 institutions have decided to embark on this exercise is because we are fully aware that corruption is a threat to our constitutional democracy. It also undermines the promotion and protection of human rights, as well as the rule of law. It also undermines the ability of the state to effectively give effect to human rights due to the impact of corruption on state resources. And there's also a view that, in view of the impact of corruption, that corruption might have to be declared as a crime against humanity in view of its impact. And therefore, we're here today to discuss this and to see how, we as Chapter 9 institutions can also assist in the necessary fight against corruption, but also to look at, the mechanisms which government has in place to try and fight better the scourge of corruption, but also to see how we can also work with civil society and all other stakeholders, in this regard. And therefore, without much ado, I will then hand over to the Deputy Minister of Justice, who will give a keynote address on behalf of the Minister of Justice. John Jeffrey is a friend of the Commission, has been an MP for a long time, and is definitely one of the leading human rights fighters in our country, even though he's Deputy Minister John Jeffrey, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Advocate Tikanyane, and good morning to everybody. Firstly, apologies for the Minister of Justice. He had to rope me in at the last minute due to other pressing urgent matters that he was attending to. But let me say, even though I'm standing in, I'm honored to be part of this very important conference. It's not often that we see many of the guardians of our constitution and defenders of good governance all together in one, albeit a virtual room. I refer to these organizations as the guardians of the Constitution because when reading the second certification judgment, one is able to see the foresight that the drafters of our Constitution had when putting in place all the necessary institutions and safeguards for our new democratic state. They had the foresight to predict that even in the most democratic of nations, structures and institutions have to be put in place to deal with a myriad of different situations, whether it be lapses in service delivery or the need to investigate and remedy improper conduct in the affairs of state. They identified that the necessity of not only having institutions which prevent and combat corruption, but in fact, any situation that does or has the potential to detract from the observance and protection of human rights for everyone. They knew that our country needed to promote the constitutionally prescribed values and principles governing public administration in the public service. They wanted to ensure that public funds be used in a transparent manner, and thus deemed it crucial to set up an institution to audit and report on the accounts, financial statements, and financial management of all national, provincial departments and municipalities. These reports are made public and are submitted to any legislature that has a direct interest in the audit. I'm specifically highlighting the roles of the Public Protector, the Auditor General, the South African Human Rights Commission, and the Public Service Commission to illustrate that not only do we have a constitution and legislative framework to ensure that we have a firm commitment towards good governance and clean administration, but also have the institutions to give effect to this framework. The question that perhaps we have to ask ourselves is whether the drafters of the Constitution were too idealistic when setting up these structures. Were they placing an over-reliance on these structures and institutions to fix everything that is broken? Or is it more a case of not empowering these institutions sufficiently and not giving them enough teeth to remedy what is wrong in society and in government? Because inevitably, many in our country will ask, when we have institutions like these in place, why is it that we have some communities who live with sewage streaming down their streets? How is it that we see some departments and municipalities racking up copious amounts of expenditure which is deemed fruitless and wasteful? From the side of government and law enforcement specifically, we've made enormous efforts in preventing and combating corruption. We play a significant role in the anti-corruption task team. We also play a leading role in providing support to the Zondo Commission of Inquiry. An anti-corruption strategy is at the core of our development trajectory. Law enforcement agencies, particularly the National Prosecuting Authority and the Hawks, both financially and from a human resource perspective, are being capacitated to ensure that they're more effective. The establishment of the Special Tribunal has enhanced the Special Investigation Unit's ability to recoup embezzled funds from the state. We applaud the SIU for their biggest recovery to date against ABB South Africa, amounting to 1.5 billion rand. Civil service reforms are underway with the professionalization of the public service framework having been published for public comment. The implementation of our national anti-corruption strategy will bring together civil society, the private sector and government to monitor implementation. As you know, the National Advisory Council on Anti-Corruption will be operational for 2 years and ensure that all components of the multidisciplinary agency are put together while reporting to Parliament on its progress. Our immediate focus is on public procurement issues related to COVID-19, the security sector and criminal justice system, and a cleanup campaign at state-owned enterprises to root out corruption. To support this, law enforcement agencies coordinate their work through what is now known as the Fusion Centre. Since its inception, the Fusion Centre has handled 231 cases or incidents relating to COVID-19. 30 cases were closed after investigation, and 31 accused persons are appearing in 14 criminal cases in courts across the country. More than 12 referrals were sent to various departments for disciplinary action for employees involved in irregularities. Furthermore, 145.6 million has been blocked by the Financial Intelligence Centre, and 119 million has been preserved by the Assets Forfeiture Unit through the Prevention of Organised Crime Act. The Special Investigative Unit has to date enrolled cases in the Special Tribunal to the value of 365 million and has to date saved 124 million involving supply chain irregularities. The South African Revenue Service recovered 165 million in taxes, and in total 718.6 million has been recovered by this Fusion Centre and returned to the fiscus. We have also set up additional special commercial crimes courts, which are at a regional court level. That is in the 4 provinces that didn't have them, Limpopo, Mpumalanga, the Northern Cape, and the Northwest, to speed up the prosecution of cases of fraud and corruption at a regional court level. So whilst these are successes and should be lauded, the pertinent question is, how did we get here in the first place? State corruption at its very core is stealing from the poor and looting resources that are meant to build our country. Funds that are meant to be used for service delivery, for human rights programs, or to build houses and schools and clinics are funneled away by those wanting to enrich themselves. Our country cannot advance if there is corruption. diminishes the public's faith in government, and detracts from the gains we've made as a country? Have we created a society where corruption is viewed as, quote, part of business as usual, where in a sense it seems par for the course for service providers to inflate their prices when dealing with the state, where some in both the private and the public sector turn a blind eye to doing business with family members and friends, nepotism and cronyism? Is this what we view as normal? There is no question that we have the legal framework and the institutions in place, but we have still not been able to curtail the very ills these institutions sought to prevent. Granted, one could argue that the work of the guardians of the Constitution is mostly retrospective in nature. They're often the ones who arrive last at the scene of the crime, where the damages have already been done. The work of the Office of the Public Protector has led to the Judicial Commission of Inquiry into allegations of state capture, corruption and fraud in the public sector, including organs of state. This has exposed some of the horrific details of allegations of corruption. The question that arises is, where were our institutions when this happened? Could they and should they not have prevented this? And if the answer is yes, then were they sufficiently empowered and resourced to be able to prevent it? Or were their remedial actions or reports ignored? And what lessons can be drawn from what has been laid before the Zondo Commission? One can argue that that we have not done well in recent years is to really ensure the work of these institutions does not simply gather dust. Our institutions cannot be relegated as less important than law enforcement institutions. If anything, the work of law enforcement institutions should be heavily predicated on reports and findings of these institutions. For example, findings of fruitless and wasted expenditure by the Auditor General should anchor investigations into corruption. In this regard, the Auditor General's reports have been given teeth to bite, so it's not just barking. No more shall the AG's reports expose financial impunity without consequences. Law enforcement agencies will be activated through these reports. These actions need our urgent attention because we run the risk of corruption subverting good governance and undermining public trust in government. This may further reduce political participation by adding to a growing cynicism about politics and political processes among citizens. Most critically, our new anti-corruption approach will have to borrow from international experience. We've observed that systems, structures, and processes do not necessarily provide the template for success. Unless the will to succeed is forged, much of any anti-corruption drive will remain a passive, idle declaration. It is as much a question of fixing the hearts and minds as it is a question of fixing the system. Furthermore, public support is vital in any anti-corruption program. The war on corruption is best won through successful action against the corrupt, regardless of who they are, and executed without fear or favor, firmly and fairly. Clear, demonstrable success is the surest way of regaining public confidence. For all of us from the side of government and the institutions which are represented here this morning, it is clear that much more still needs to be done in deepening democracy and good governance in South Africa. How do we do more to prevent corruption from manifesting itself? How do we deter and uproot malfeasance? These are but some of the crucial questions which this conference will need to consider over the next 3 days. Thank you very much. My apologies for having to leave. I have, as the chairperson of the Human Rights Commission had indicated, a SANAC Human Rights Technical Task Team, which I'm chairing at 10 o'clock and have to attend there in person. But I wish you all the best for the discussions, and I hope that you can come up with real solutions for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Minister, and also thank to the Minister for allowing you to attend this important event. And thanks for your kind words, and we'll certainly engage going forward. Thank you. You are released. Colleagues, we'll now hand over to Professor Bongani Majola, the chairperson of the Human Rights Commission, to give his opening address. We're still trying to get the acting public protector connected, but hopefully she will join us before then. Over to you, Professor Majola.
Thank you very much, CEO. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all our distinguished guests and panelists, and to thank them for taking the time to attend this very important conference. A warm welcome also and greetings to the Deputy Minister of Justice, and to thank him also for the words of wisdom that he has left us with. I am sure that some of the questions that he has raised will feature in the reflections that will take place over the 3 days. I would like to welcome also the Acting Public Protector, Advocate Kollega Galega, and also welcome the Commissioner of the Public Service Commission, congratulate him for his appointment and welcome him very warmly to this meeting, Dr. Somadoda Fikeni. I would like to welcome also the Director General of the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, Advocate Dr. Mashabane, the Operations Officer of the Office of the Public Protector, Ms. Thandi Sibanyoni, the delegates from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights present, the President of the South Coast Business Chamber, Dr. Peter Moons, the Executive Director of the Corruption Watch, Dr. David Lewis, Human Rights Defender, Dr. Mr. Tabiso Zulu, the IPID Directorate, Mr. Matthew Soko, and then the representatives from the Office of the Auditor General. I'd like to welcome you all to this historic meeting. I think it is historic because its aim is to talk about corruption in this democratic country and reflect on what to do to release this country from the clutches of this man-made pandemic. I applaud you, therefore, for coming together for such reflection. Indeed, Edmund Burke said, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank various stakeholders who have shown a keen interest in this conference. We look forward to your inputs in the next 3 days. All your inputs will be of great value in reflecting on how the South African Human Rights Commission and other stakeholders who are concerned about putting an end to the scourge of corruption should move forward if they are to make a meaningful impact on corruption in this country. The Commission envisages that this dialogue is the beginning of a series of constructive conversations on the issue of corruption in this country, and particularly in the public service. Corruption has become a national crisis. It is no longer for the government alone or the Commission alone to fight it, but it has become a war that all of us ought to be engaged in. Before I forget, please allow me to commend and extend my gratitude to the Office of the Public Protector, and also to commend the President of the South Coast Chamber of Business and Industry, Dr. Moons, for collaborating with the Commission in hosting this important and constructive discussion. Of course, this conference could not take place without your participation and blessing. Thank you. This conference and theme are highly significant and opportune in this specific month of March, which is coincidentally Human Rights Month. Some 8 days ago, on 21 March 2021, South Africa commemorated Human Rights Day. The commemoration serves as a constant reminder to all of us, the living, of the suffering and injustices suffered by those who were murdered at Sharpeville and at other places because they dared to demand equality and other fundamental rights and freedoms. The conference is occurring at a time when South Africa, and indeed many other countries, are experiencing the ravages of the coronavirus pandemic with heightened unemployment, poverty, and inequality. It also takes place against the backdrop of high levels of corruption, as is revealed by, among others, the National Development Plan of 2030, the Corruption Perception Index 2020, which ranks South Africa 44th. The most recent probe by the Portfolio Committee on Higher Education and Science and Technology into allegations of maladministration, irregular appointments, and corruption at the National Students Finance Aid Scheme, NSFAS. Evidence led at the Zondo Commission has indicated that senior political figures, public officials, and business personalities have been seriously compromised by corruption. On the face of it, the evidence sounds as if there has been institutionalized robbery of the public purse without care who goes hungry or goes sick or even dies. The outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic has also created a more fertile environment for malfeasance by presenting opportunities to public officials and other unscrupulous people to enrich themselves at the expense, especially of the poor and the marginalized. Following the announcement of National Treasury's instruction on the procurement of emergency procurement procedures to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, many reports surfaced about corruption-related practices around medical safety gear, personal protective equipment for healthcare workers against COVID-19, thus threatening the lives of healthcare workers and patients who have contracted the pandemic, the virus. Additionally, the Competition Tribunal has meted out administrative fines to private companies for excessive pricing of face masks sold to customers during this period. There has also been reports of theft or selling or diversion of food parcels intended for families who had no income during the lockdown. This has resulted in increased food insecurity for the poor, the homeless, the undocumented migrants, and others, which has been detrimental to the right to have access to sufficient food. Graft does not only threaten human rights enshrined in the Constitution, but also the embodiment of constitutional democracy. It is a hindrance to service delivery and violates basic and socio-economic rights such as access to adequate housing, to healthcare, food, water, social security, and education. It targets the poorest and most vulnerable in our society, and thus perpetuates and widens the inequality gap. Furthermore, one is constrained to agree with President Ramaphosa, who said in his 2021 State of the Nation address, corruption is one of the greatest impediments to the country's growth and development, hindering the government's obligation of promoting social and economic development of communities as contained in Section 152, 153, and 195 of our Constitution. Corruption has a direct bearing on the realization and otherwise of human rights. Reports indicate that South Africa has therefore lost in excess of 1 trillion rand due to state capture alone. As it carries out its work in promoting, protecting, and monitoring and assessing the observance of human rights, the Commission has witnessed and noted the implications of corruption, particularly on marginalized communities. The Commission has therefore identified corruption as one of the cross-cutting issues that it must deal with as part of its strategic plan for the period 2020 to 2025. In this regard, attention will be paid to the effects of inequality, children, gender, disability, older persons, migrants, and the role of business. The end result for the fulfillment of the state and the relevant actors is: 1, good, clean governance in the public sector, full compliance with the Prevention and Combating of Corruption Activities Act, pro-human rights and anti-corruption governance systems established in all national, provincial, and local government departments. The legislation of the Commission assigns it, inter alia, the advisory, monitoring, and investigative powers. In relation to human rights violations and infringements, in terms thereof, the Commission proposes to use its advisory powers and make recommendations to the state on corruption, where it considers such action advisable for the adoption of progressive measures for the promotion of human rights. And I must say that whatever will come out of this conference will help us in that regard. Corruption has the potential to overturn the positive gains of the last 26 years of our democracy. The primary question that I hope this dialogue will help to answer is how we can best respond to corruption and address the threat that it poses to the country's constitutional democracy and the rule of law. I wish to thank all who are taking part in this conference. It is extremely encouraging that so many view corruption as a danger to our democracy and wish to contribute to the elimination thereof from our society. We are looking forward to various ideas that will emanate from the discussions over the 2 to 3 days on what the country can do and how to do it in order to rid itself of the scourge of corruption, on what each of us individually can do and what communities can do to make the fight against corruption a successful one. My wish is that by the end of this conference, we should have identified what we want to do as a contribution to fighting and eradicating corruption. I hope that in whatever we do, however, we will avoid what happened with apartheid. Especially towards the end of apartheid, there was general consensus that apartheid was bad. In addition, no one admitted to having supported apartheid, yet it had grown and spread like weeds. Many who probably supported apartheid would be heard saying, I never supported apartheid. In fact, I've got many friends who live in townships. In the end, not only should we say we did not support corruption, but we should also add that we fought against and eliminated it. On a more serious note, corruption is an existential threat that requires each one of us, led by the state which is the custodian of the public purse that gets plundered on a daily basis, never rest until this country has been rid of corruption. Nelson Mandela is quoted as having said, what counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived. It is what difference we make to the lives of others that will determine the significance of the lives that we lead. Wishing you a fruitful discussion and a solid start in the fight against corruption. I thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson, Professor Majola, for your kind words. And of course, the big question, how best can we fight this sketch? We'll now be joined by the Acting Public Protector, Advocate Galeka, who is also a partner in this conference and also a partner in the journey group. Welcome, Acting Protector. You have the floor.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Program Facilitator, the CEO of the Human Rights Commission, Mr. Tsiriso Tipanyane. This morning, I wish to pass my greetings to the Deputy Minister of the Department of Justice, present here, Honorable Jeffries, the Chairperson of the South African Human Rights Commission, our partner in this conference, and also our partner really in putting out the work out there that Chapter 9 institutions constituted such as ours are doing, Professor Bongani Majola, the Auditor General, Ms. Tsakani Maluleke, the Commissioner of the Public Service Commission, Professor Somadoda Fikeni, Mr. Matthews Siseko of the Independent Police Investigative Directorate, the President of the South Coast Business Chamber, Dr. Peters Mans, Mr. Tabiso Zulu, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I greet you all on this bright morning that has been presented to us by the Human Rights Commission. As we bring down the curtain of the commemoration of Human Rights Month, I really would like to thank the South African Human Rights Commission for such a pertinent dialogue and for assembling a panel comprising of esteemed panelists, such as the ones that we have on this panel, who will surely add value to the discourse and assist us as we pave the path ahead. I am comforted by the fact that we're not merely looking at human rights in abstract, but the extent to which corruption derails the respect for and upholding of human rights. As the Office of the Public Protector, we appreciate this opportunity presented by this platform to interact with like-minded institutions so as to find common solutions to problems we are commonly tasked with tackling. Indeed, the fight against corruption requires a collective effort, and seminars of this nature to give us a good starting point, especially as we will be crafting the year ahead into the new financial year. On the onset, I would like to suggest that in order to effectively root out corruption out of our system, we ought to have a common understanding of what we are dealing with. You know, that would really assist us to have a better chance of triumphing over it. Chairperson, you've outlined the Zondo Commission, which has really unraveled the extent to which systems have been used as facilitators to corruption, which is mainly the work that comes before us as the Public Protector South Africa, where there have been gaps in the systems, where there has been maladministration as a result of particular systems not having been followed. So the work that we do as Public Protector South Africa directly interlinks with the corruption that we see taking place in our country and that has taken place over the past years. Maladies such as irregular, fruitless, or wasteful expenditure or maladministration, for instance, are often labeled as corruption. They might not be actually corruption, but they might be a path that leads to corruption should they not be attended to, should there not be a fix or a correction into our systems and a proper follow to the policies and legislation that would have been put in place to ensure accountability and transparency. Hence, we end up finding ourselves leading into corruption without any accountability taking place. All these accounts are wrongdoing, which have no place in our public or private administration, but they might not necessarily fit the definition of corruption which law enforcement investigates. And this is where then the Chapter 9 institutions come into play. Because what we have also pertinently observed together with the Human Rights Commission, hence we have partnered in the current investigations that we are doing into the NFCs and previously into the Alexandra Renewal Project, is that these malfeasance that take place, these lapses in governance that take place, definitely result into an infringement of human rights. They result into the lack of service delivery, which denies the people of South Africa the basic rights which are enshrined in our constitution. We really need to define corruption consistently with the global definition of it and its organization, that the lack of transparency, according to which corruption results into the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. And this is exactly the work that we deal with day by day as Chapter 9 institution. To put this into context, think of a decision maker who solicits a bribe from or is offered by one other person in exchange for a favorable decision. In this setting, both the decision maker and the person whose favor the decision is made guilty, and they're guilty of corruption or any other malfeasance. Neglect in properly executing your duties in such a manner that it prejudices the next person. Those are the kind of malfeasance that we are speaking about, and that mostly result into the corruption, which really is displayed in a very vast and complicated manner at the Zondo Commission. Perhaps looking at corruption through the human rights prism, Transparency International adds that it erodes trust, weakens democracy, hampers economic development, and further exacerbates inequality, poverty, social division, and the environmental crisis. This is exactly what we see transpiring within our own democracy in South Africa. Transparency International further observes that, I quote, "The cost of corruption can be political, social, environmental, and economic. In this regard, freedom, rule of law, citizens' participation and trust in government, healthy environment, and a sustainable future, as well as opportunities to build and grow health, are negatively impacted," I unquote. Program facilitator, if I may, I wish to pause here for a minute and use a true story to illustrate the truth in the observations made by Transparency International. This is a story of the impoverished community of Kalpan village near Itsoseng township outside of Mafikeng in the northwest. In rainy seasons, life in the village comes to a standstill. The access road leading in and out of the community gets flooded and muddy. As a result, the vehicles belonging to teachers that work at the local primary school cannot enter the village, just like those of essential workers such as nurses who are based in the area cannot leave. The school bus, which ferries learners to a high school outside their village, cannot use the waterlogged road in case its big wheels get stuck in the mud. In other words, teachers in that community can't teach. Learners miss out on learning. Local nurses can't go to work to render healthcare services, and the entire community is cut off from the rest of the world until the road is dry. But things didn't always have to be like this, because nearly 10 years ago, the Mahikeng local municipality put out a tender to appoint a contractor to build a tarred access area. The contractor moved on site, installed curbs on parts of the 3-kilometer stretch, and disappeared, leaving the road as dusty as ever. For that, the contractor invoiced the municipality and pocketed a 4.4 million rand at taxpayers' cost and no work having been done. This was made possible by a false certification from the erstwhile head of the Department of Roads of the municipality, who fraudulently confirmed that the services had been rendered and the invoice was fair and reasonable. These were the findings our investigation had found, and in last year, February, we directed that the current municipal manager conduct an analysis of work still to be done in that road and determine the cost thereof and timelines within which the project can be completed. He also had to access the outstanding work, appoint a new service provider, and provide us with an action plan regarding the completion of the road project. Now, this is why we also directed the municipal manager to report the activities of any official who inspected the road to law enforcement to ensure that the root cause of this matter is being dealt with at all angles available, from our side, from a maladministration, but also from the law enforcement side. This story, program facilitator, paints a sad portrait of the cost of corruption involving players in both the public and private sector. Statistics paint a gloomier picture. The Parliamentary Monitoring Group estimates that the size of the corruption phenomenon in South Africa is about 25 billion rands annually. According to the Minister of Economic Development, Minister Ibrahim Patel, corruption costs the country's economy at least 27 billion rand in gross domestic profit and causes the loss of 76,000 jobs annually. Corruption contributes to poverty and unemployment within our country. In addition, the 2018 Afrobarometer report, based on a survey with a sample of some 51,000 people in 34 African countries, show that South Africa is one of the countries where there is a notable increase in public perception that corruption is getting worse, since particularly in 2008. This was in contrast with countries such as Botswana, Malawi, Mozambique, Senegal, and Zambia, where people believe that their governments are making gains in public sector corruption. In response to a parliamentary question, the Minister of Police, the Honorable Minister Bekitele, shared the statistics for the period of April 2015 to January 2019 in the National Assembly, where he shared that, I quote, 1,959 cases were reported to the South African police in terms of PRECA, 1,589 prosecutions took place, and 135 convictions were secured. A further 2,262 cases were reported to the Hawks during the same period, and of those, 2,040 were trial ready, while 523 resulted in convictions. And 581 cases of suspected corruption and bribery were reported to the detective services during the same period, of which only 99 resulted in convictions and 23 were still being investigated. What defense do we have against corruption? And I think it's one of the pertinent questions that we should answer here today. For me, we really need to look at a collaborative effort, not to work in a segmented manner. Because if you look into the trends of corruption, they are interlinked and they are interrelated. And we fight corruption from our own corners, from a segmented point of view. My view is, whilst we are moving at the direction at which we are at, we are still far-fetched from eradicating and ultimately preventing corruption I will not go on to state the legislative pieces that we have in place. My view is that we have one of the best legislative pieces in the world. It is its implementation that we all need to work towards together. To implement this elaborative legal framework, several institutions were even established. We have world standard institutions. I think the work now is to strengthen these institutions, but most importantly is for these institutions to work together. At a policy level, government recognizes that corruption undermines good governance, which includes sound institutions and the effective operation of government in South Africa, and that the country needs an anti-corruption system that makes public servants accountable, protects whistleblowers, and closely monitors procurement. This is spelled out in Chapter 14 of the National Development Plan. The NDP recognizes the laws such as PRECA, the Protected Disclosures Act, as central to the combating of corruption. It also recognizes the public protector as one of the key role players in the fight against corruption. So on paper, we have all that we need, not only to disrupt corruption activities, both in the private and public sector, but also to nab the perpetrated, prosecute and convict them. However, the entire anti-corruption arsenal that I have just referred to needs to have the willpower and the courage of their convictions to doing their work without fear, favor, or prejudice. This must be complemented by the willingness of witnesses to report incidences of crafts and for their protection. But this can only be the case in an environment where whistleblowers feel safe. This is public knowledge that most of them, as we will hear from Mr. Tabiso Zulu later on, feel exposed to danger and that there aren't enough safeguards to insulate them from retaliation, which may at times be fatal. In addition to this, there must be political will to fund and capacitate anti-corruption institutions so that they are effective and efficient. In fact, the NDP agrees. In Chapter 14, it says that institutions such as the public protector are amongst those and ought to be adequately funded and staffed and free from interference. From our side as the public protector, we will play our role in terms of our constitutional and legislative mandate. Should we come across evidence which points to possible corruption, we will continue to have these referred to and brought to the attention of the relevant authorities. Other actors must play their part too in a collaborative effort. The fight against corruption is not going to be won if we work in silos. We must join hands and fight on the same side. Those who witness acts of corruption must not turn a blind eye. Whistleblowers must be protected. Once reported to appropriate institutions, there must be action. The system must function just as it is meant to be. Implementation must be consistent with what is being put on paper. The NDP must be realized, and the NDP must not be realized selectively. It expressly reflects on the role of the Chapter 9 institutions. Therefore, in the states and governments' anti-corruption strategy, Chapter 9 institutions must become an integral part as we are part of the food chain. I want to repeat, esteemed guests, that we will not win corruption if we do not get our systems right. We would not eradicate corruption if we do not get our systems corrected, if we do not rehabilitate the public governance system to ensure that it is able to realize the rights of the people as enshrined in the Constitution. Corruption is a demon that must be flushed out of the system, both in the public and private sector. We also need the private sector to equally, specifically business, to equally join hands with us, put in place systems within their sector to ensure that they do not perpetuate the corruption within government, because government does not do corruption alone. As we've been hearing from the Commission, business is an integral part of the system failures of government and of corruption that takes place in government. So failing to do this, which trust will be eroded, democracy will be weakened, and economic development will be hampered, while inequality, poverty, social division, and the environmental crisis will be worsened, as Transparency International warns us. To ensure that indeed, as Chapter 9 institutions, we uphold our mandate to be the vanguards of democracy, to strengthen this democracy. Indeed, Chairperson of the South African Human Rights Commission, this is a pertinent discussion for us to have to revive our mandate. It's always good to go back, to take stock, and realize that how do we make sure that the human rights approach to preventing and combating corruption is relevant? It is on point in 2021, and we are sufficiently capacitated to approach and to combat and prevent corruption head on. I thank you. May you have a fruitful day, and may all the discussions that are taking place here today really contribute and enhance our mandates. I thank you.
Thank you, Advocate Gallagher, for those very important words. And of course, the issue of us working together as chapter institutions, but also how do we also provide a better regime to protect whistleblowers and other human rights defenders. Thank you. We'll now hand over to our colleagues from the Auditor General. I hope they are here. Mr. Van Schalkwyk, I hope he's here. Mr. Van Schalkwyk, are you here? Okay. If he's not here, we'll then hand over to our colleague and friend, Dr. Fikeni from the Public Service Commission. And thanks for availing yourself, Dr. Fikeni. Over to you. Please unmute. Please unmute. There must be a button for mute, unmute, Dr. Fikeni. Rulani, can you please help?
Okay, thank you. Do you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Thank you very much. Again, let me first thank the South African Human Rights Commission for organizing this very important forum, which we hope will lead to some concrete action. And we really appreciate being part of the family of people who are trying to join hands to fight the scourge of corruption. Whilst many colleagues have been talking of the Chapter 9 institution, I just want to say that we are from the family of the next chapter, Chapter 10, but we are close cousins as well. I just want to say that in the first instance, I would like to acknowledge the Deputy Minister of Justice, even though he has just left. And I would like to acknowledge the DG of Justice, like to acknowledge the Chairperson of the Human Rights Commission and all the commissioners present and the executives of the Human Rights Commission, and the acting head of, the acting public protector. I would like to acknowledge all the participating entities today. I'll just highlight a few things and hopefully we can reflect on them when the time comes. The first one, when we talk corruption and human rights, these are actually the opposites. When corruption thrives, human rights dies. When human rights thrives, then there is usually minimum or no corruption. It is that simple. I just want to start by saying that the problems that we face have become a lot more complex. Therefore, no single institution, not even government alone, can win this battle. The key thing is how to have a maximum mobilization of all the forces of good over the evil of corruption. This includes the state itself and all its organs, including the Chapter 9, Chapter 10 institutions. This includes the business or private sector. This includes the civil society and all the different role players that can play, because the scale of the problem has become that big. But the key question in the Public Service Commission that we're wrestling with as we issue reports after reports, as we do investigations of departments, is why do we have such good institutions and systems which are globally acclaimed, and yet the outcomes do happen to point in the opposite direction? Why there is a gap between the institutions or the systems and the actual practice on the ground? That, I think, as many of the speakers who came before me have alluded to that issue, and I think this conference or webinar, if successful, would have to come as close to answering that question as possible. The next fundamental question is whether our South African exceptionalism has not hindered our ability to learn from others, where we often say it wouldn't happen to us. And yet many other countries who have gone down this road, who can tell us how these things evolve and how they manifest themselves, we could learn a thing or two from them. Perhaps at a fundamental level, I would say, in my observation, our democratic transition invested quite a lot in developing institutions of democracy, the architecture of democracy, and most of these are in place. They also invested a lot in developing the social infrastructure. Most of it is in place. But where we seem to have fallen short, and we may need to focus on, is development of a human being, the human consciousness, principles and values. Because it is quite clear that what has enabled this corruption is not the failure of institutions per se, but those who are the drivers, those who occupy some of these positions, may not have the moral code and the ethical, conviction to deal with some of these things. It is therefore the position of the Public Service Commission that if we are to succeed in fighting corruption, if we are to succeed in providing adequate human rights for all, if we are to succeed in dealing with the issues of service delivery protests, if we are to succeed in dealing with policies that never get implemented, at a fundamental level would be to build the capacity of the state. And that in itself goes with the professionalization of public service. And that is the current campaign that is ongoing now from the Public Service Commission, also championed by the National School of Governance, also championed by the Department of Public Administration and Public Service and Administration. Because anything else we can talk about, if you do not have a capable state, then all these things we talk about become a pipe dream. But building a professionalized public service, building a capable state, will take all the different players here, the Chapter 9 institutions, the law enforcement agencies, the institutions from the security cluster, and so forth, working together in a coordinated fashion to make sure that we succeed in what we're doing. The other thing that we've observed is how institutions of government compete instead of complement each other. And as such, whatever success they make become minuscule in face of what is institutionalized, as Professor Majola said, and organized, systemic, corrupt, activities. There are a number of reports and which have come out of the investigations that we've made and even the proposals that we're making. One of those, for example, the unlawful instruction, which speaks to the interface between the political and administrative arm of departments or institutions, where you have the accounting authority and the accounting officer at loggerheads at times. This has not been helped by a high leadership turnover, which leads to loss of institutional memory, which leads to disruptions at times, and which also leads to policy turnover. And the wrongful appointments, many of you have already alluded to that. Even the report recently issued of public servants doing business with states and sometimes doing business with the very departments which they control. And that in itself has not been contained. So what then one would say about the future trajectory? We ought to be realistic and begin to understand what is there before us and what will be the political and the general environment that will have to deal with these challenges. But before then, let's think about our debt crisis. One economist was saying we are paying 1.3 billion rands per day to service the interest of our debt. And much of this debt is not just the inefficiencies, but it is the corruption that we alluded to in different cases. That combined cumulatively has increased our debt, and that corruption, even during the time when the country was facing existential crisis, seemed to have, not been stopped. During the PPE scandals, for example, people were prepared to steal even that which has to save the nation at the most critical moment. Now you can imagine that even the loans that are given to the country, that debt accumulation, those who are corrupt and the patronage systems will continue to loot even the loans, themselves. I want to end by asking the question, if we are to deal with this issue, can it be dealt with only at a government level? Yes, government has a very crucial role to play. If you have a collapse mainly of African families, which lead to a collapse of communities and therefore a collapse of society. Isn't that one of the areas that we ought to be looking at? Shouldn't we be looking at our education system as one of the primary socializing agents in order to see how we change the consciousness? Because this is also about learning new things, about unlearning old things, and relearning that which ought to be a professionalized, ethical public service. So we ought also to be looking at the ecosystem of corruption in the public sector, in the private sector, in the civil society, because as you see with the Zondo Commission, you find that government unit or a public figure is working with the private sector, so you can't separate these. We ought to be looking at how these have interpenetrated each other. And therefore, I also want to say one point before I close. How do we define corruption if we come at a figure of 27 billion, for example? If, to give one example, you have South Africa always sending the biggest delegations to every conference around the world. Sometimes they even Google and invite themselves to these conferences in order to have allowances, the per diems, in order to take people they favor or like into these conferences. At face value, that doesn't look like corruption. But in essence, I want to say it is actually corruption, because you bring in people who are not supposed to be in these delegations, and therefore you inflate some of the costs in a manner that at face value looks normal, looks approved, looks like there is nothing to be concerned about. So to me, I would want us to widen the notion of corruption to that willful use of what looks like legitimate and legal and formal means in order to override and undermine the system and extract in a parasitic manner from it. Favors, allowances, and many other things we can talk about, which in the final analysis have the same effect. And also, in the end, I want to close by saying, in this particular workshop or webinar, shouldn't we be examining why generally South Africans tend to mistake talking for action? And sometimes we feel satisfied that there was a workshop, there was a conference, there was an Indaba, there was a Lehotla, and so forth. And yet, very many of those never translate into action. I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fikeni, with the last challenge that more action and less talk. Colleagues, unfortunately, we've had a few challenges with our speakers from the AG and from IPIT due to connectivity challenges and other engagements. So basically, what we've agreed with them is that we will change the program slightly. So they will speak tomorrow before we come in with the Office of the High Commissioner on the human rights approach to anti-corruption measures. We'll then break for tea, remote tea, virtual tea, and then we'll come back at 11 o'clock. We'll then start. Unfortunately, Dr. Peter Moons also has some connectivity problems. So we'll substitute that with some other colleagues. Subin Naidu and his other colleagues will make a presentation before we then hand over to Mr. Tabiso Zulu. So can we then take a short break until 11 o'clock? Thank you.
All right, is the sound working, Chiliso? Have we got sound?
I can hear you, Paul.
Lovely. How are you keeping, man? You're looking so fit.
Oh, okay, thanks.
I just
Yeah,
look old, old and tired.
okay. Yeah, okay. You'll have to put on your camera here.
Start video. How does that
Yeah.
look? Is that okay? Is that picture working? I could probably get the light a bit better.
I
Is
can
that
see
good
you now.
enough?
Yeah,
You can
okay.
see me.
Yeah, I can see you.
Okay.
Okay,
All right.
so at 11, we'll give you a call in 5 minutes time.
I'll just hang in and sit here quietly. I'm afraid
Okay.
I've got two ridgebacks downstairs, and if they decide that they want to participate, there's very little that I can do to stop them participating. But you know, we're
No
in South
problem.
Africa.
Okay, we'll see you at 11 then. Okay,
Lovely. Okay. Enjoy your tea.
bye.
Lovely.
Okay, 10 minutes,
10 minutes is
Same with-
fine for me.
Yeah, yeah. Let me see. Yeah, 10 minutes. Well, give you 15 minutes. It's fine. Yeah. Okay.
I'll just speed up.
Sure.
I'll speed up if I'm running out of time.
Okay.
At
Thank
11
you.
o'clock kick
Bye.
off.
Sure.
Hoffman, hello. Hello. Hoffman, hello. Hi, morning. Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah. Okay. Okay. I believe I'm on. Cheers.
Yes, please mute. Ladies and gentlemen, it's 11 o'clock now, and we'll then continue with the second part of today's event. Due to some challenges we've had, we've found a replacement for the 11 o'clock slot. So we'll now have Advocate Paul Hoffman, who is a member of a group called Citizens for Integrity, the A-Team, together with Kubin Naidu and other colleagues, who will then also share their reflections on the issue of corruption and its impact on human rights, and how do we address this sketch. Paul, over to you. Please unmute. Please unmute.
Unmute.
Thank you.
All right. I believe that I'm now live on air. Is that okay? Lovely.
We can hear you now.
Good. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity that you are recording to the A-Team. We thought that we could come in as a super sub sometime towards the end of the program, but that's not the case. It seems that the gods of connectivity are conspiring to give us an opportunity ahead of other people, and we are happy to step into the breach for the hosts of the conference, the Human Rights Commission and the OPP. It is a great pleasure to be here, and it is also very heartening to see so many important people speaking this morning along a theme that does indeed concern the Citizens for Integrity, or as we like to call ourselves, because we're all in favor of action, the A-Team. The A-Team is really the brainchild of Coogan Pillay and of Willie Hofmeyer, and I've been roped in as a consultant to the A-Team because I've been banging on about corruption for so many years. So let's get on with the job, because I believe I've only got 10 or 15 minutes to waste it, all protocol observed, and away we go. I think the starting point is to regard corruption as a serious crime. And if you see it as a crime, then it is indeed the work of themselves in the crime of corruption, and that includes kleptocracy and the capture of the state, which cannot be done without corrupt intent. We suggest that the starting point is the creation of effective and efficient anti-corruption machinery of state. Not only is it an international obligation in South Africa, it is also underpinned by the binding decisions of the Constitutional Court in the Glenister litigation. And the court has identified corruption as a human rights issue, so there's no debate about that. You cannot have a Bill of Rights that is respected, protected, promoted, and fulfilled in a corrupt state, because the funding that is required for delivery of the rights guaranteed to all in the Bill of Rights simply doesn't happen when money is diverted to the corrupt. We suggest that there are obligatory criteria applicable to that machinery, and they've been set out by the court. We remember fondly the Scorpions, who had all of the criteria except security of tenure of office. The Scorpions were a mere creature of statute, and as a consequence of being a mere creature of statute, a simple majority in the court, in the parliament, was sufficient to disband the Scorpions, and that happened shortly after Jacob Zuma became president of South Africa. Today, we've come a lot further than that. I think that the position of some of the main players is worth sketching. The NEC of the ANC, that is its National Executive Council, made an announcement in August last year calling upon Cabinet to urgently establish what it called a specialized, permanent, multidisciplinary agency that is standalone, a single entity, that is independent and able to deal with corruption without fear, favor, or prejudice. The position of the cabinet is not quite as advanced as that of the NEC. The president, during the State of the Nation address on the 11th of February, talked about the overseeing by an advisory council, which we think is quite unnecessary, of the initial implementation of the anti-corruption strategy. And here's the important part: the establishment of an independent statutory anti-corruption body that reports to Parliament. Now, the difficulty with creating a statutory body is that it is no stronger, in no better position than the Scorpions were, and that unless it is given the constitutional protection that of the kind that the Chapter 9 institutions that are already in existence have, the creation of a statutory body is vulnerable to the same fate as the Scorpions enjoyed. As far as the Ministry of Justice is concerned, it's quite apparent that that ministry is desirous of a best practice outcome, but has still not decided where the body should be. The Ministry of Public Service and Administration favors a STIRS compliant Chapter 9 body, STIRS being specialized, trained, independent, properly resourced, and secure in tenure of office. And the Ministry of Police hasn't taken a position yet, and obviously the leadership of the police and the National Prosecuting Authority favor the status quo for reasons that obviously suit them, but not necessarily the trajectory of the country. The National Anti-Corruption Strategy that was published during the course of this month has gone further than the president went in SONA, and it has added the word constitutional to the idea of a statutory body. Now, clearly, a body that has constitutional protection is secure against the ravages that the Scorpions suffered back in 2009, and we need to get ourselves into a situation in which the single entity which the NEC of the ANC favors and the protection which the court requires is the order of the day. I remind delegates of the opening words in the last Glenister case delivered by our Chief Justice in November 2014. He said, on behalf of the majority of the court, all South Africans across the racial, religious, class, and political divide are in broad agreement that corruption is rife in this country and that stringent measures are required to contain this malady before it graduates into something terminal. We are in one accord that South Africa needs an agency dedicated to the containment and eventual eradication of corruption. We also agree that that entity must enjoy adequate structural and operational independence to deliver effectively and efficiently on its core mandate. Now, these words reaffirm the position of the majority in the earlier Glenister case, which was delivered 10 years ago this month, a joint judgment of Deputy Chief Justice Moseneke and Justice Cameron. And in that case, the STIRS compliance became the law. Remember, STIRS stands for specialized, trained, independent, properly resourced, and secure in tenure of office. Those 5 binding criteria have been set by the highest court in the land, and their acronym STIRS has been honored in the breach during the Zuma administration's which enabled the capture of the state. In Parliament, there has been some progress towards the STIR's compliance. The Chief Whip of the IFP asked the President to consider establishing a new Chapter 9 Integrity Commission to investigate and prosecute corruption. The President found that notion refreshing and undertook to mull it over. The official opposition is known to be working on private members' bills which are aimed at setting up this Chapter 9 Integrity Commission or anti-corruption entity, if you don't like the words Integrity Commission. We did, in Accountability Now, we did start with the idea of an anti-corruption commission, but along the way, and we've been campaigning for this for 10 years now, along the way, we decided that it was so negative to be anti-corruption that it would be better to be pro-integrity, which is perhaps why Citizens for Integrity has taken the name Citizens for Integrity and has asked me to address this conference on its behalf. What we need to understand is that a 2/3 majority in Parliament is required to create and to disband a Chapter 9 institution. At this stage, no party in Parliament, no single party in Parliament enjoys a 2/3 majority. So it is going to be necessary for cross-party support and cooperation in order to get the 2/3 majority that is required to establish the new Chapter 9 institution, for which we plead and which is already favored by the Department of Public Administration. The suggestion that I want to put on the table at this conference on behalf of the A-team is that good governance throughout the public administration and the state-owned enterprises is central to the prevention of corruption and to achieving compliance with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 16. And as Professor Fikeni has already indicated, this is a question of education and training. Indeed, education and training are of the essence of the change in mindset that is going to have to take place in all corners and every nook and cranny of the public administration, the municipalities, and the state-owned enterprises. And we have on the website of Accountability Now a pledge by the public administration and a bill of responsibilities, which we suggest are a useful tool in the processes that are required to educate and train those who run the country. Another idea which Citizens for Integrity, or the A-team, has punted for some time now is the idea of integrity testing of personnel at decision-making level in the way that it has been done in the SIU for the last 10 years. If this is used and used with success, as has been the case in the SIU, across the board in decision-making and financially involved positions in the state-owned enterprises and in the public service generally, then we get to a situation in which the right people are in the right job, not the deployed cadres. Proper deterrence of the corrupt is achieved by ending the culture of corrupt practices with impunity, of which the Chief Justice complained back in 2014, but which are still the case to this day. So I've made the point already that the body envisaged in SONA 2021 is liable to suffer the same fate as the Scorpions if it is not given the protection of the status of the Chapter 9 institutions. We consider that the...
Half a minute.
I'm on my last chapter. Very nice, thank you. We consider that the position of the Archbishop of Cape Town, Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu, is the patron of accountability now. Our former public protector, Thuli Madonsela, and other leading citizens, that a new Chapter 9 institution to tackle corruption is what is needed. It seems that the cabinet is there, except for the final S in STIRS, which is the security of tenure position, and the noise in the public administration, in the civil society, in the new Defend Our Democracy movement, and in opposition circles, is that proper anti-corruption machinery of state, which cannot be conjured out of the SAPS or out of the NPA, which can be done if a new, carefully appointed body is put in place, is what is required. Thank you. Those are my submissions.
Thank you, Paul, and your colleagues for those words, and of course, a lot of food for thought, at least from us in the Chapter 9 institutions. Our next speaker is going to be Mr. Thabiso Zulu, who is he's a whistleblower, and he was actually a client of the commission. We took a case on his behalf last year, but he's also mentioned in a book by Mandy Weiner called The Whistleblowers. So he will share his own experiences around the issues of corruption, as well as the challenges of whistleblowers. Mr. Zulu, over to you.
Thank you, CEO. I hope I can be heard by everyone. Protocol observed for purposes of time. I'm not here on my own behalf, but I'm here on the behalf of many other human rights defenders and other anti-corruption activists out there. I have said in that book that you quoted, CEO, that I'm uncomfortable with this term of a whistleblower because it limits one. But I've since come to terms in accepting it, that's how one will be referred to always. I will start by saying what was said to me by Ugogo Regina Khatebe. She said, angazi uNkulunkulu ukuthi akasangithathe ngani kunokuthi ngiphile lempilo yosizi. Loosely translated, I don't know why God is not taking me or is not calling me instead of continuing to live this desperate and difficult life. She said this in 2016 because she was having a difficulty in finding a house. She had been renting at different places for almost 15 years. Gogo Regina Khatebe was semi-blind. She couldn't walk properly. She was 8 years old. It was the second time I met her on the day she said these words. And we tried to fight on her behalf. We wrote to different people. We tried to make sure that she does get a house, only to discover that she didn't get a house because houses that were supposed to be received by people of her who were under her own situation, where those houses were taken by those who are in power. One such a house was given to a stepdaughter of a councillor. One such a house was given to a mother-in-law of the very same councillor. 5 million rand of state money was spent in building what was supposed to be 48 houses of the most desperate and vulnerable people of the area of Copsville. But those houses were built without environmental impact assessment. Those houses were built and were later occupied by some people who didn't qualify to be in those houses. Today, we're still waiting for Public Protector's report on something that we reported in early 2017, late 2016. It's some of the things that we need to talk about, that the Chapter 9 institutions, when matters and issues that relate to poor people are reported to, they must fast-track investigations. Gogo Regina is no longer alive. She died a very terrible death alone in the house that she rented. A house which I am only calling it a house now for purposes of you to understand. But it was a concentration camp of some sort because it didn't have even had proper windows. She died not because of old age, not because she was ill, but she died because of cold weather, because it was difficult for her to continue living in such a house. The other thing that one will have to relate to, because I said I'm not here to talk about myself, but I'm here to talk about the situation on the ground. I may not provide sophisticated and intellectual higher grade solutions, but I'm going to tell you what is happening on the ground. How do we feel when we are affected by things that are happening on the ground? And these kinds of the interactions and these kinds of webinars must not turn into talk shops, because if they do, situations that affected the Ugogo Regina will continue to happen. My late friend, my comrade Cindy Somagat, gave me documents in 2016, 27 documents that related to Mzimkhulu Memorial Lecture corruption, fraud and corruption. He was later shot, spent time in hospital, and later died. No one has been arrested who is a political figure. Those who were arrested were later released. The NPA made an undertaking that they were provisionally withdrawing those charges. They were still going to reinstate those charges. Today, we're still waiting. It's more than 2 years. We're waiting for them to reinstate those charges to politicians. Many other people that have been killed because they are exposing corruption. No one gets arrested who is in the political arena, but only the foot soldiers and the middlemen. Politicians, we are told that there is a political investigative team that was pronounced by the president together with the National Minister of Police. But if it is a political investigating team, why there is not even a single politician in KZN who is in the dock? Most of those who were in the dock, all their cases collapsed. The case of Maqatha Mchunu in Pietermaritzburg collapsed. The case of Mangasha Wandile Ngobeni Etemalahleni collapsed. The case of Cindy Somagaqa, on the part of the politicians, the case collapsed. It can go on and on. The case of Sibusiso Sibiya in Durban collapsed because the state failed to protect witnesses. The last witness was later killed in Bizana and the case collapsed. The case of Wandile Mkhize and many others. But without spending too much time on discussing what had transpired as a result of corruption-related political killings, let me go further and say the former municipal manager of Richmond, Sibusiso Sithole, submitted an affidavit to Commercial Crimes Unit in Pietermaritzburg on 11 November 2016. In 2017, in March, he laid in front of near a police station where two assassins had taken him out. And up until today, no single person who ordered that hit is in the dock, but only foot soldiers and middlemen. The other thing that is important to say is that institutions like the financial intelligence sector must play their role. We're having a case at Herigwala District Municipality where a contractor or someone who is involved with tenders was laundering money through the account of his employee. his employee was earning less than 7,000 rand. Within 2 weeks, that money in the account will be finished because that's what he was earning and he was spending his money. But at 3 different occasions in the very same account, another time 70,000 rand came through, another time 800,000 rand came through, and another time 170,000 rand came through to that account. It will come through at 9 o'clock and it will be withdrawn even before 9, all of it. Why didn't financial intelligence sector send a peek that there was money that was going through the account and it was withdrawn within minutes of it entering that account? This money was put as if it was a salary. How can someone who earns something like 7,000 rand at all occasions for more than 3 years, but only at certain specific times, this person earns 800,000 rand, 170,000 rand, and the other money that I mentioned? These are some of the things. So on the part of the financial intelligence sector, they must play their role. On the part of the National Prosecuting Authority, it is frustrating that at times cases that involve fraud and corruption, they take too much for senior public prosecutors to make decisions. They put the people that are giving information at mercy of those that they are reporting, because at times the people that are giving information around that fraud and corruption, they later get victimized at different places of work, and there is no protection to do that. I'm not going to bother spending too much time on Whistleblowers Act and everything for today. Maybe if it is being discussed at another time, I will make an input. But all that I want to focus on is that we are also having a situation where even police themselves are not assisting in these investigations. We're having 2 cases, but I will make an example of one. We're having a case of a certain person whom I will name Tulani, and I will never give a surname. Tulani had given us information and we forwarded that information to the DPCI, the Hawks. On the day when the investigators had arranged that they must consult with him, as he was a primary witness in the matter, they consulted with him. Later at night, he was visited by unknown people. He was intimidated and all. We had to go and fetch him on the very same day. We had to make sure that he is taken care of for full 2 years. And that case later collapsed because one policeman said he can't, this matter can't continue because one witness who was with Tulani when a certain bribery man was handed over, this person confirms to him verbally that yes, he was there, but he's refusing to make a statement. And other members of the DPCI that I spoke to, they said, but it doesn't mean that the case must collapse as a result of that. The investigator must play his role. Unfortunately, it was the very same investigator who had leaked the very same information that on a certain day we had met with the primary witness. The other thing that is important is the part that deals with some of the corruption that relates to security companies in many of the municipalities. It's rife, it's there, it's happening. We'll cite one example. Let us use Herikwala District Municipality as an example. In 2011, August, a tender of 8 million rand was awarded to a certain company. This company, it later received more money than the money that it was expected to receive every month. We wrote a letter to National Treasury. National Treasury investigated. Mr. Solichitangano wrote a very detailed report. The report made it clear that there was fraud, there was corruption, there was money laundering, and many other things that were related in the report. What later transpired is that, what later happened is that one of the people who was a speaker of the municipality, Mr. Mandlango, took the municipality to court because he was trying to stop the municipality continuing to pay this security company. The matter was thrown out of court, not on merit, but on technical basis that what was urgent of it, because the matter had been there for almost 35 months, the contract was coming to an end. The reasons that we provided that we were on a rush of running to court on urgent basis because the contract was coming to an end didn't suffice. The company, which was supposed to have been paid 8 million rand, ended up being paid 22 million rand. These are some of the things that are happening. And what happened there is that unregistered security guards were used. And it is the role of SIRA, the private security industry, the regulatory authority, which is supposed to make sure that security companies are not using unregistered security guards, because it is the very same security guards that are used as hitmen. It's the very same security guard that are used to do wrong things. It's the very same security guard that are given weapons and other things to assassinate people of this province. So it is the responsibility. We have written to SIRA. They don't have an appetite, any appetite to make sure that we have a meeting with them and we raise some of these things. And it is the role of the state security agents to make sure that they deal with these things of having people that are running around carrying weapons and people that are running around wearing uniforms that are similar to army uniforms and all. But if that doesn't happen, then it means the threat to the state remains very open, because we are having people that are trained as security guards, but they don't have, they are not properly registered because they are not under SIRA. They've got access to weapons and all. The other thing that is important to raise is the issue of corruption doesn't only steal the future of our children, but corruption kills. If I've narrated other cases, and I can go on and on. The case of Goku Regina Khatebe, she was not killed by any firearm, but she was killed because she was denied an access to a proper shelter, a proper house, which is a basic human right, which she was promised as early as 1994, when the democracy was ushered in this country. But currently, you are having a lot of other people who are denied an access to basic commodities like water. Water tankers are taken to only to houses of those who are closer to councillors. And this is happening across the country and across the province. Corruption that is rife. Trucks that belongs to the municipalities are destroyed so that private trucks will be hired and they will make a lot of money. And it's happening. And these are some of the things that are reported. Lastly, in the province of KZN, thanks very much, CEO. Lastly, in the province of KZN, we are having a situation of the school nutrition, where friends and associate of senior people in government positions and in political parties are the only ones who are benefiting. These are programs that are supposed to be assisting the orphans, the widows, and many others through, if they have formed companies and cooperatives, they are the ones who are supposed to be benefiting. But who are benefiting are those who are closest to senior people. But the other important thing that needs to be raised is that it's a very painful thing to be a human rights defender. You live a life, you live a recluse life, you live a life of a pariah. Some of us are walking with gun wounds in our bodies. We wear them as a badge of honor, but it's very painful. It affects our families. And at times when you raise these things, we are on your own. Everyone hears your plight and everything on TV, but all that people are interested about, they are interested in coming with a different dogma and coming with higher grade intellectual solutions that are based on internet. That has got nothing to do with what is happening on the ground. People are talking about what they think is happening. They are not talking about what is happening, because we people on the ground, we know what is happening. We have taken bullets for it. We have had our own children growing up thinking that one day they will have to revenge for us, instead of our own kids as young as 10 years having to think that they need a soccer ball, they need a chocolate, but they've got to think that one day if we get killed, they will have to avenge for us. So everyone and anyone who doesn't perform his duties in making sure that we defend and we protect the future of our children, everyone who doesn't assist in making sure that those who kill people because they've exposed corruption, those people are accomplices in the killing of the people that are killed in this province and national, in places like Mpumalanga and other places. And at the end, those cases ended up not getting solved. Thanks very much, CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Tulu, for your input. And I guess tomorrow we'll hear a bit more from our colleagues from the Auditor General, as well as IPID, on the challenges, again, we still continue to face as far as corruption is concerned. Thanks very much, and also thanks for your bravery. We know you are still a hunted man. Nobody has been found yet for the attempted assassination on yourself last year, October, November. Thanks for that, and hopefully we'll see you again. Ladies and gentlemen, can we now move to the last part of the conference, which is discussions and comments, just for an hour or so, and then we'll see you tomorrow. So I hope I'll see the hands. If I don't, you can just shout. So the floor is open for inputs, comments. Thank you. No comments, no questions.
Hello, Chair.
Yes, I'm speaking to.
It's Fikeni.
Oh, Dr. Fikeni, please, you have the floor.
Yes. It is quite clear that when we talk corruption, we are no longer talking random acts of corruption. We are talking of probably a parallel system or a parallel state. And it is well organized. And in my view, from the presentations made, if those who want to fight corruption do not show the same level of organization and complementarity and coordination in their conscious, concerted efforts, it then is going to be a battle that will be very difficult to win. Now, I want to ask, COVID-19 has moved us kicking and screaming to the fourth industrial revolution. That means e-governance, e-commerce, e-learning, and everything else on these platforms. Whilst we are still worried about what happened in the previous years, what are we doing in the trend analysis and scenario reflections on what crime is evolving to become in the cyberspace or in different spaces of the Internet of Things? Because we might find a solution in 2 years for problems that have already been outdated by new forms of corruption. So that, to me, is one of the first things. The second one, what are the chances of succeeding in this battle if the political class in all its different formations, not just the ruling party, but opposition and so forth, are embroiled in their own internal crisis? So those are some of the two questions I would ask. Of course, the fundamental one I had raised is how to raise public consciousness so that the 68 million plus people begin to understand the implications of corruption and it get infused in our education system, in our socialization, in our media spaces, in everywhere. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Fikeni. Can we take 2 more inputs, then we can respond and comment on the comments? Thank you. Kugan, is that a hand? Kugan Pile, is that your hand or what? Okay. Okay. I was told that Mr. Willie Hoffman wanted to make a few comments as well, if he's able to speak. Okay.
Can you hear me now, Advocate?
Yes.
It starts tomorrow at, what time is it? Let me just check tomorrow's proceedings. Tomorrow it starts at 9:30 as well. I'm not sure how they're going to rearrange because there was someone from the the Auditor General today who also could not speak. So they will be moving things around.
Can someone mute?
Mama too.
All right.
Mama too.
Yes, CEO?
You are. Can you mute?
Oh, sorry.
Yes. Coogan, can you have the floor?
Yes, Program Director, thank you. Before I come, my colleague Willie Hoffman, I wanted to come in, but he said he's muted. Can you unmute him?
Okay. Chorulani, can you please unmute Willie Hoffman?
Mama too, please unmute.
Sorry, who am I unmuting? I'm also getting calls on the side from everyone asking me to unmute.
Please unmute Willie Hoffman.
He has been
Okay.
unmuted.
Willie, you have the floor.
Good day, it's Willie Hoffman speaking. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Willie, you have the floor.
Good day, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Willie. Okay, I can't hear Willie anymore.
Hi, this is Willie Hoffman speaking.
Yes, you have the floor, Willie. Please speak.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity. I wanted to speak briefly or fairly briefly about some of the things we can do better about preventing corruption from happening in the first place. And the proposals that, and let me say, I agree with many of the proposals that have been made already. I think there is a lot to be done. But I think one of the proposals that I'd like to make with my colleagues is that we should be also focus more on how we can prevent corruption from happening. And I think the best model that there is in the state at the moment is that of the Special Investigating Unit. And they've set up quite a sophisticated internal integrity model. And that model essentially uses something called voice stress analysis. So people get asked a range of integrity related questions, and the machine gives you an indication whether the person is telling the truth or not. Now, the reason why this is very important is when you start suspecting that something's going wrong, it's very difficult to know exactly where and when it is going wrong or where there may be possible corruption. And the model that the SIU set up, the use of the voice stress analysis, really helps you to narrow down very effectively where the possible corruption may be happening in the institution. But I think the second very important part of that model is that it is a significant deterrent, because people don't know what is going to be picked up by this voice stress analysis. So my proposal is that one should really think about the vulnerable groups in the state. And I think the first vulnerable group is those involved in supply chain management. And I think those involved in supply chain management should go through this kind of testing, both before employment and regularly after employment. I think the second vulnerable group that we should look at seriously is that of law enforcement. We know that many bad appointments have been made in law enforcement. And again, it was very easy in a sense. Once you have a bad president, it's very easy to ensure that bad people are appointed in law enforcement. So I want to make a further suggestion around supply chain management. We know, for example, that lawyers, there is a bar association, there's an attorneys association that can take action against people in the state. And we've seen it in the NPA, for example, where some of our lawyers were removed because the bar association could take action against them. So I think one of the things we should be considering very seriously is a proper professional association of all those involved in supply chain management at all levels of the state, national government, local government, provincial government, and the SOEs, I think are all the institutions where this is necessary. So I think in brief, that's the major proposals I wanted to make. I do add my voice to my support also to all the other proposals that have been made. I think they're very important. Perhaps one proposal that hasn't been articulated that clearly. The NPA has quite a good witness protection program that can offer protection. But at the moment, the protection is not very clear in relation to whistleblowers. And I think it's important that we should think about engaging with the NPA, that in certain circumstances where whistleblowers are at threat, that they should be able to get onto the witness protection program, even though they may not be formally a witness at the time when they need the protection. Because to determine whether somebody is a witness or not is a fairly long process. Otherwise, I support the other proposals that have been made, and I think the idea of a single entity that has the responsibility to deal with corruption for me is important, because we do find in law enforcement, both the Scorpions, the SIU, the NPA, all of where I've worked, is we have many different priorities, from murders, rapes, many other things that affect the community very, very directly, and very often they want priority attention. And so I think a body that is focused just on corruption issues for me is very important if we are going to make real progress in dealing with corruption more effectively. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Willie. Third input before we respond to what has been put before us.
Thanks, Program Director. If I could come in briefly. The name is Kugan Pillay, working closely with Willie Hoffman and Advocate Paul Hoffman. And just to go on from the theme and the previous speakers, this is a unique year. It's the 27th year of our democracy. And if everyone remembers, Mandela spent 27 years in jail for our freedom as well. And I think it's critical as we engage this Human Rights Month to assess how far we've come since '94. And in my previous article, which I've shared with many, I raised the importance of the Zondo Commission, which gives us an opportunity to introspect and to look at how far our constitution, and the NDP for that matter, has helped in advancing a democratic society and a society of human rights. And in that regard, I think It talks closely to the theme, corruption and human rights. And if we look at the explosive, vile revelations coming out of the Zondo Commission, especially in Human Rights Month, and this particular month, and even a few months ago when Deputy Chief Justice Zondo has asked for the public at large, for whistleblowers to come forward, and then we had quite the opposite from the former president, Jacob Zuma, who's basically given the commission the middle finger and threatened not to attend. I think it exposes the potential weaknesses for us. And I think it's in that regard, the Zondo Commission can play a pivotal role in calibrating how far we've come from '94, but also how far we have yet to go, and the role that whistleblowers have played in exposing corruption, which undermines the human rights ethos of our constitution, which has worsened the plight of the poor, the vulnerable, the unemployed, and hence it's no wonder that poverty, unemployment, and inequality have worsened. And as Mandela said, poverty, unemployment, inequality, these are all man-made issues. And I think we owe it to ourselves to take his baton forward in fixing this. In that sense, Program Director, I support the endeavors of the conference and look forward to engaging further. Thank you.
Thank you, Coogan. I don't know if colleagues from our side, Public Protector, Human Rights Commission, want to respond to any of the issues being raised. I'm sure Mr. Zulu might also want to say something about his experiences as a whistleblower. I see the chairperson is raising his hand. Chairperson, let me start with you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you to all the presenters. I think one of the issues that we need to face is part of what Dr. Fikeni raised, and that is that there is no single institution, not even the government alone, can win this battle. In other words, the question therefore is, how do we ensure that all the role players that are needed for purposes of winning the fight against corruption are on board? Mr. Zulu, for example, gave us frightening examples of what he says is the failure of the police to play their own role. Now, the Deputy Minister is not here. I do not know whether the police were invited to hear. How do we then get those arms of government which are vested with authority to intervene and to stop things or to move things? How do we get them to come in? Or is this now a lost cause? The problem is so big that it's difficult even to start moving it, you know, because it is a must that if we're going to fight corruption, people who commit corruption have to be called to account, and the way you call them to account includes them being prosecuted, arrested, prosecuted, and sentenced. So how do we bring those two elements, the police and the prosecution authority, into the equation, so that any strategy that we adopt is reinforced by what they are there to do and they will do? I'm sorry, I'm adding questions instead of providing an answer.
Thank you, Chair. Anybody else from Human Rights Commission, Public Protector? Okay.
CEO, I note the hand of Rihanna Reward. I don't know if I should unmute.
Okay, you can unmute. And there'll be Mr. Zulu afterwards, I think. Rihanna.
Hi, I'm Advocate Rihanna Rawat. Thank you for a forum such as this. I find it most exhilarating, but I think a lot of good has come out of the suggestions today. The question is, where do we go from here? The reality is, and I think one of the key components at present to exposing corruption is encouraging whistleblowers. The point is, as the last speaker said, there is no guarantee of the police protecting. I want to say upfront that even the witness protection program itself, as it stands, ought to be scrutinized. And one looks at even someone like the detective, Charles Kinnear, who ought to have had protection, and who the state failed so dismally, and who had to pay the highest price for that. So my point is, we ought to look at practical solutions immediately. We need people to be whistleblowers. The reality is that the threat and the fear out there is very real, and is so deeply entrenched and systemic that it goes to the highest echelons of protection. So at present, I can tell you there are lots of people out there who would say a lot if they had the correct protection and the correct forum within which to do that. And I think that should be a primary consideration immediately. Thank you.
Thank you, Rihanna. I see Acting Public Protector and then Mr. Zulu.
Thank you. Thank you, Program Director. I think firstly, let me comment the comments that have come through and the presentations. I think we've got key role players who are outside of the system and who actually know the running of the system, who've been in the system, know its deficiencies, and who've got solutions that can really take us forward. And my comment is that, we need to find a way to bring them on board so that we do not just view them as side critics, but we view them as pertinent partners who are a part of this fight against corruption. And I think for me, that's really a gap that we need to tighten, because we easily get agitated and irritated by an external voice, and we don't want to internalize those criticisms and actually let them assist us to reflect and to better the system so that we can optimize our mandates and have a better impact on the work that we are doing. So it is really critical that we find a way of working together and having those views internalized within our systems. Thank you.
Thank you. I've seen Mr. Zulu. Now I see we have been joined by our colleague, Peter Muns. We'll give him a few minutes after Mr. Thabiso Zulu. Welcome, Peter. Mr. Zulu.
Thank you, CEO. I'm not going to take too much of your time. I will agree with the Advocate Rawat when she spoke about the witness protection. I think even Advocate Willie Hoffman alluded to something around the witness protection. I have tested the witness protection, but I will have to be very careful of how I say this. I think that there needs to be a total overhaul of the witness protection. I think it's based on the old systems that worked at that time. There are a lot of things that are wrong. You travel in an untinted car, right? They don't vet you before they put you into a program to see where you'll be safe. For an example, they wanted to take me to the Lower South Coast. The Lower South Coast is few kilometers away from Mzimkhulu. They don't vet the B&Bs or the lodges where they place you. They don't vet the owners to say who owns this place. Does this person qualifies to host certain kinds of people? I would have said quite a lot of other things, but because of time, I will not. But the other important part in this is that I think that there needs to be totally zooming in on forensic companies. One of the things that we're starting to notice in KZN, especially the biggest culprit is Department of it's COCTA. It's called COCTA, Cooperative and Governance. Whenever you are raising issues around a certain municipality and they start investigate on their own, or you raise something that entails to another department of government, but it involves the municipality. Once they see that there are people that are implicated, what they will do, they will go and fetch one of their own forensic companies. Then those forensic companies will investigate for years, and the report will gain dust. It will never be released in public. All that you'll read in newspapers that people have been cleared, right? You as a complainant, you don't even get a chance of being interviewed or being asked to hand over any documents. It has happened at Umsunduzi municipality, it has happened at Ethekwini, it has happened at Herikwala municipality, and many other municipalities. So the issue of the forensic companies, I think I was even wondering the other day where one can report them, because we have got tangible information that some of them are part of covering up of the corruption that is happening in municipalities, and they get paid quite a lot of millions for doing that. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Zulu. Dr. Mann, I hope your system is stable. You can say a few words. Since you're supposed to talk about corruption and human rights from a business perspective. Peter.
It's a network problem.
Okay. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, yeah, please just say, I know you came a bit late, but you can just give us short reflections from the business perspective.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, thanks very much, Sally. So, yeah, thanks very much for the invite, and apologize for the late entry. But we've had the last 28 years of research. We've participated at a community level. We have also organized over the years and participated in the local community policing forums. So we have a very, very good understanding of the local dynamics and also the history of corruption and crime within KZN and also at a national level. So I think, and I also heard the previous speaker, that we need that collaborative cooperation. We need this interaction, and it has to be an ongoing process. We're very familiar with these crimes against humanity. We're very concerned about the levels of corruption that have taken place in this country over the last, specifically the last 10 years, where 3 trillion rand has gone missing. The country's 4 trillion in debt. And this is where we've got no confidence, investor confidence whatsoever. It's created a major problem for us. And I think that this is the perfect platform for us to engage, and also beyond this collective interaction and participation to make a difference. We're not just going to be a talk shop, but even in October last year, we established the National Peace Commission. We also made application to be an oversight commission, the oversight committee to the Zondo Commission and also the Anti-Corruption Tribunal. And that was not accepted. And we found that there was an absence of political will. And we're seeing things that are coming out now that are really serious issues of concern for us. So civil society and business, captains of industry, business chambers, and mind leaders in commerce are now becoming very concerned that we need a body, we need a voice of public opinion, a loud voice, a voice of truth, reason, and wisdom to make a difference going forward into this year. That we need to see prosecutions, and we need to see those who are actually beyond allegations. But prosecutions are extremely important as a deterrent to future acts of corruption, which have just been, those in itself are crimes against humanity.
Sorry. I was saying thanks a lot, Peter. Sorry, I was muted. And I hope you'll be here for the next 3 days.
We'll be here.
Thank you. I hear there's a hand from Victor. I don't know whether it's our Victor or which other Victor. Victor?
Hello, colleagues.
We can hear you. Yes, it's Victor from the Human Rights Commission.
Yes, colleagues, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity also to share my views regarding the topic, corruption and human rights. I think I really agree with Mr. Zulu. I also agree with all colleagues, but what I can say is that there is a question that how do we deal with the issue, because we all acknowledge that there is a problem. But the challenge is how do we deal with the issue? I understand that there is a need for all the institutions to be involved, not only the government or not only the Human Rights Commission or Chapter 9 institution can deal with the demon of corruption and win. But what we can do, I believe that we have to start somewhere. Yes, we can have this conference, but it will need us to come up with ideas as to where should we start. I once thought of something, maybe from the provincial level, because I'm in Limpopo, that if we were to find a situation where the Human Rights Commission and Public Protector and maybe the Public Service Commission working closely, more especially when we investigate human rights violations. But if the Public Protector is also there, because it can also take the issue of maladministration. Because in most cases where there are human rights violations, or where you find that they were supposed to be delivery of water or construction of roads, or many issues that are related to violation of human rights, you will find that most of those rights are violated because money has disappeared after being allocated to fund that particular project. So if we were to say, let us work hand in hand, which means that if the Human Rights Commission find a situation where money has disappeared, we will immediately refer the case to the Public Protector to take it up. Or when I will give you an example from Mr. Zola. I think you are just spot on, because the same situation that you are talking about regarding the infrastructure in the municipality, more especially with regard to water. There is a certain project that is in Guyana. That project is not being run properly to ensure that water has to be delivered through trucks. Through tendering processes, they will employ private companies to deliver water. But when you ask why this water reticulation is not working or is not being operated in full capacity, they don't provide any answer. The same applies to Skukuni area in Limpopo. Commissioners were there when we were dealing with that particular issue, but we were all shocked that instead of a reticulation pumping 11,000 cubic liter, it's only 1.5. The rest of the village are being supplied by trucks. We don't understand why. One of the mayor, district mayor, made a proposal during the commissioner's visit to say that why the municipalities are not buying the trucks to deliver water to our people. Why are they not buying trucks? But I understand from Mr. Zulu that they will end up destroying those trucks to make sure that they sustain their project to deliver water in our villages. So those are the challenges. But I believe that if we can start being more practical, we can work together from the provincial level with the public protector, so that when we squeeze any company or any government department or whoever, when we squeeze them, they will have nowhere to go. Because somewhere, somehow, you'll find that we cannot investigate maladministration, but we can see that here the rights are being violated as a result of maladministration or corruption. So I believe that at the end of this conference, we can come up with a very good or solid proposal that maybe from this particular period, let us see if we cannot pilot this kind of working relationship and see if it cannot work. We have to start somewhere. We can't give up. We love our country, and we have to make sure that we eradicate corruption in our country. Our people are dying. The death of Ugogo, I think I fully agree with Mr. Zulu that indeed people are dying as a result of their rights being violated. But to link that with the end results or with the passing on of Ugogo, some people might think that that is far-fetched. It cannot happen. But that is true. That is what is happening. Our people are dying because they are not getting medication from our clinics. They are not getting medication from our hospitals. They are not, even if they are in chronic, some of them, they don't get the correct medication and all those things. That is as a result of corruption. So I believe that working together, we can change this country. We can make inroads in terms of what should be done in fighting corruption. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. I'm told we have Advocate Luisa Zondo on the line, followed by Mr. Willie Hoffman again. Sorry, followed by the Acting Public Protector, and then Mr. Hoffman in that order. Thank you. Miss Luisa, are you still here? Luisa Zondo.
Hi, I actually have some connectivity problems, so I decided to just put my comment on the chat box. I don't know if I'm audible.
We can hear you. Our first CEO of the Human Rights Commission, welcome.
Sure, thanks a lot. Thank you so much for organizing this conference. The two institutions that I am deeply associated with have come together on this, the Human Rights Commission and the Public Protector. So thank you very much. And thank you so much for the contributions. They truly highlight the depth of the problem, compounded by the impunity with which the systems of corruption actually operate. My question or my invitation really is that, you know, in as much as it's important for us to start creating institutions that may be effective in addressing corruption at various levels, we also have to recognize the factor that it is actually people who have now been shaped in society to think of themselves in a particular way, to think of society in a particular way, to think of connectivity to life in a particular way, that actually makes it such a rife thing, makes corruption such a rife thing. It's because we are now caught up in the system. None of us can legitimately say that we don't contribute to this system of corruption, from whatever perspective you look at it. And so I was trying to invite us that even as we establish institutions, we create solutions, we actually should be looking at how we actually reach the human being and the way we perceive ourselves. Some would call that consciousness. How do we build it in so that in every effort that we are undertaking, we are actually looking to make those shifts in us as humans so that we come to value certain things on a common basis, and therefore our conduct in the various places that we find ourselves in all the time reflects how we see ourselves as human beings. That connectedness which will cause me not to cause Ugogo to die because Ugogo has gone cold and hungry. That consciousness which is going to cause me not to ignore the impacts of staying away from my desk in my public service job on the aunt who is therefore going to suffer because they are not going to get their medication. That kind of thinking. So I really do invite us to think about how the integrative approaches can help us to actually make the shifts in ourselves as human beings with a certain level of consciousness. Thank you.
Thank you, Louisa. Now we'll get Willie Hoffman again. Willie.
I just wanted to add one other proposal that I omitted last time because I thought we were running out of time. But I think the one issue for me that is very critical is in almost all cases of corruption, state departments or state institutions call in forensic accounting companies to come and do an investigation. And we always thought that is a good solution until we heard what happened with KPMG and others. So I think, and in my own experience, I must say that I have actually fairly reliable information that in a province, the Premier himself set up a number of forensic investigation companies to be able to call a friend in the furniture business when the Auditor General says there must be a forensic investigation. So in short, I think one of the things that we should look at is to advocate for a proper regulation of the forensic investigation industry. Like there is a bar association for advocates and for attorneys, I think there should be a professional body for forensic investigators. I think people need to write examinations to be brought into to qualify to be a member of such a body. And I think if we can clean up the forensic investigation industry itself, that is for me also one of the things that can make a very big difference in at least dealing with that's not preventing corruption, but at least it can help us to deal more effectively with the investigation of corruption. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Willie. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come towards the end of day one. So I'm just left with closing remarks. And just to say, I really want to thank everybody for their participation. And of course, we did have some teething problems at the beginning in terms of connecting, but I guess it's ending very well. For those who came late, who are unable to connect, tomorrow there'll be a slight change. Tomorrow we're supposed to be discussing the issue of a human rights approach to anti-corruption initiatives. But we'll start at the beginning with inputs from the Auditor General's office, as well as IPIT. This will also then respond to some of the issues raised about, how do we relate with issues of policing, and also how do we relate with the issues of the state in a broader manner. Then we will then move to the issues of the human rights approach to corruption. That will be led by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and of course then from us as the Human Rights Commission. And then day 3, then that's when we'll be looking at issues of a way forward, a future towards a much more effective anti-corruption community. And it's very clear that there is a need for all of us to join hands in addressing this problem, not just from a narrow perspective of the criminal law agency, but as it has been pointed out, corruption impacts on human rights, it impacts on every aspect of our society. And as Dr. Fikeni was saying, for us to win this fight, we really need, to, come up with much better systems, a much more integrated approach, but also an approach, as Luisa was saying, which is informed by the values, when the principles which inform our country. But also, as other colleagues were saying, we always need to bear in mind that, corruption has a human face. As Mr. Zulu was talking about Ugogo, that thousands of South Africans whose rights are denied, who are unable to get health care, who are unable to get education because somebody somewhere has decided to loot national coffers for their own interest. And somewhere, some government official is not doing his or her job. And somewhere, other citizens who see the corruption happening are scared to say anything because of what has happened to other human rights defenders and whistleblowers like Mr. Zulu. So we are seeing this, colleagues, as an entry into the discourse by the Human Rights Commission as well as of Office of the Public Protector, because as we were saying earlier on, corruption does undermine constitutional democracy. It does undermine human rights. And we, as the two institutions, have a mandate to ensure that, we fight this fight in a proper manner. And of course, as Dr. Fikeni was saying, we also have our own cousins in Chapter 9 institutions and elsewhere. And therefore, for us, really, our vision is to contribute and facilitate to a much wider anti-corruption community, including civil society, organs of state, so that we can all fight this issue in a happens to one, happens to all of us. That's really what we want to be doing tomorrow and going forward. And we really want to appreciate everybody's presence, and we'll continue tomorrow then. So we're doing this online. COVID-19 has forced us to do things differently, and we hope it's not as bad as it could have been. And therefore, we really want to thank everybody. I also want to thank our colleagues who helped to put the conference together, including colleagues in IT. Of course, they had to get a bit of a mouthful from the CEOs this morning when we're battling to connect people. But as they say, it's not how it starts, it's how it ends. So I really want to thank everybody, and we'll see you tomorrow at 9:30 sharp. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.